All right. It's great to have you all here this morning. Glad that you were all here. My faithful few. So, that are here. I don't know what to tell you, Delmer. I mean, we'll see. It is Memorial Day weekend. So, into school as well, I could see people moving, shaking, going other places. But for those of you who are here, I appreciate it. So we are going to be continuing our discussion, going through the big stories in the Old Testament throughout the Bible, our foundations class, and this week we're going to talk a little bit about, to go a little bit off of what we've been talking about. We see the class title called it Consequences of Favoritism, and we see some of the fruits of that in our class discussion this week. So we're going to begin by reading Genesis chapter 37 in its entirety. There's not that many of us today, so get prepared to read a few verses. So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 37 this morning, again, and we're going to read through the entirety of Genesis chapter 37 between us. So, but I appreciate you all for sharing in that burden, so that way you don't have to hear me.
You want to do 2 per person?
What do we do 2 per person? I think that's a great idea, Don. 2 per person. We'll do that. So I read the first 2, and then we'll go to Courtney. Sound good? And then we'll go back around to Tracy or Brian, actually. Sorry, not Brian. To Daniel. I just said Tracy, and then there you go. So yes. Now, actually, we'll end with Kristen. So we're going to go 2 per this morning because we do have 36 verses in this chapter. So we'll go Genesis chapter 37. 37. All right. I'll start verse 1 and 2. Y'all catch up. I feel confident then. All right. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him.
Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed.
Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and his words.
Now he had still another dream, and related it to his brothers, and said, "Lo, have I still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down before me, were bowing down to me, sorry." And he related it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him, and said to him, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?"
His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem.
Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to him, "I will go." Then he said to him, "Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers, and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem.
And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock."
And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him.
"Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns, and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams."
But Reuben heard this and rescued him, and out of their hands said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into the pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father.
So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the very colored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, without any water in it.
Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood?"
Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt.
When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?"
Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And then they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This is what I have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not."
Then he examined it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes and put a sackcloth on his loins and mourned his son many days.
And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard.
All right. So, a lot of things to cover here. So first off, this first question was not in our reading. However, if you'd like to read a little bit of where we were before, you can see what had happened. So the deaths of Rachel. So chapter 35 and verses 16 going forward. If you'd like to read that, you can another time. But Rachel, of course, being the wife that we know, his name is now changed to Israel. We also did not cover that story. But Jacob is called Jacob. Jacob had this incident where he is out in the wilderness, and then he wrestles with this person who is later identified to be God or an angel of God, and there's a whole debate about that, whether you want to take one side or not on that. He was renamed from Jacob to Israel, Israel meaning wrestles with God at this point. And so, because he wrestled with God, which makes me think he actually wrestled with God, not an angel. How did that work? I don't know. But he is renamed Israel at this point. However, the text kind of goes back and forth as to what they want to call him, because sometimes the text still calls him Jacob. Sometimes the text calls him Israel. For our purposes, we'll just keep calling him Jacob. But Jacob, at this point, of course, we know he had to work the extra 7 years for Rachel. So this is the favorite wife that he originally wanted in the first place. She was unable to have children until later on in life, and then she was able to have 2 children. The first child that Rachel gave birth to was Joseph. Okay, so we know that. Now, then she was able to give birth to a second child. However, that is the child that she ended up dying giving birth to. And that child was Benjamin. And I'm going to give credit to Rachel. This Rachel, not this Rachel. Who identified these things earlier today.
That
So
wasn't what she named him.
Yeah.
She didn't name him
Yep.
Benjamin.
That's correct. It says here, for she was dying, and he named him Ben-Onai. So, but his father called him Benjamin. So, it's very interesting that I think if my dying wife gave a wish of a name for a son, I think that's probably what I would call that son instead of changing the name to something else. But yes, you are correct. That is not what she named him, but instead what Jacob decided to call the child, which is Benjamin. So again, Rachel first gave birth to Joseph and then died giving birth to Benjamin. Now, we see, like I said, the class is called The Consequences of Favoritism. Favoritism being because it's very clear Jacob had a favorite wife, and Jacob had favorite children. Not good things of what you should say specifically. Well, yes, son, if you wanted to emphasize there, yes. Which we then will later see the fruits of that bear out. Now, I want to notice something first within the text. This is something that I have not talked about yet whenever we've been going through this. We're going to go back to Genesis 37. Verse 1 and 2 says, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. Verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob, period. Then it goes into a new story. You might think that's very strange kind of wording to say, now this is the generations of Jacob. And you would expect there some sort of genealogy, right? Because you'd say, if I said, these are the generations of whatever ancestor, you would expect me to then say, this person gave birth to this person gave birth to this person, because we're literally saying a genealogy. However, what this is signifying in the text, this is called a toledoth. A toledoth. Toledoths only really appear a lot of times in the book of Genesis. We see them often in the book of Genesis. I have yet to point them out. However, I feel like it's important for us to notice them, because what they really are doing, it's supposed to be a transitional phrase. It's saying, this is a new story. Right? This is a new transition into a very important story. And you can see that in the text because we've been talking about Jacob. And now the main character is shifted to Joseph at this point, right? We see this throughout the book of Genesis, right? That happened multiple times. It happens from Noah, and then it goes from Abraham, and then it continues on going forth into Isaac, and then to Jacob, and now to Joseph. And there's this transitional phrase, and you see this throughout Genesis. And I think it's important because the wording sometimes can get very, very strange, because we're expecting a genealogy, but then we don't get that. We instead just get this transition, because now we're talking about Joseph, and Jacob is now a side character. Okay? He's no longer our main focus anymore. It's all about Joseph and what goes on in Joseph's life, which is kind of interesting, because now it seems like we are getting a favorite story from the Bible about Joseph. So, Joseph was hated by his brothers because he was the favorite. Because he was the favorite. Firstborn of his favored wife, and also the child of his old age, as the text tells us at this point.
The sins of the father.
The sins of the father.
Go back to generation.
It's a very interesting point, isn't it? Because I think a lot of times when we read that, we might say, because we have some evidence this in the Bible where it talks about sins of the father going on the children. Now, does that mean that the actual sin, that the sons are guilty of the sins of their fathers?
Consequences.
Because that's sometimes when we read that, we might think, okay, that doesn't seem fair. The son didn't do anything wrong. It was the father who did something wrong. And so the sins of the father go on to the son. That doesn't seem fair, that they would be stained by the sins of their father. But what it's really more meaning is the consequences of the father's actions. And this is why we talk about, it's kind of a, I don't know if, frankly, I haven't heard of it much of my life, and this has come out a lot recently, talking about generational curses. Let's talk about, certain sin issues that reflect from parent to child and continues on, whether it be aggression towards or lack of patience towards their children, aggression towards their children, these kind of things that are seen as a generational curse because it continues throughout generations. And I kind of experience this myself because I have to do a lot to work on my patience sometimes and not losing my cool very quickly when it comes to the people that I hold dearest. I'm mostly pretty cool and calm with other people outside of my household. It's a very strange thing. But whenever it's people within my own household, like my wife, I have to be a lot more conscious of being patient towards her. And the reason for that was because my father had a lot of issues holding that in our house growing up. He was very impatient with my mother, very impatient with me, very critical with me, very critical with my mother, and it kind of happened. However, he was a million times better than my grandfather was. Right? I only have one living memory of my grandfather, and it was him yelling at me because I didn't eat a biscuit or something like that. It was something very strange. So it was this continual generational curses, you could say, where it's not that my grandfather's anger and alcoholism and other such things affecting me because his sin literally stained me, but because of his actions, that reflected onto my father, and then my father then imprinted that onto me. Now, am I better than my father? Am my father better than my grandfather? I don't even want to know how far those generations go back, how terrible somebody was. But that was much better in that way. Go ahead.
So it's up to you to break it.
Correct, and that's what my goal is. Me and Anna talk about that all the time because she also has her own generational curses in that way. So we have those things that we can do. And so when we read that in Scripture, we don't want to say it's literally like a stain that somebody is guilty of the sin of their fathers or grandfathers, but that it is in fact usually the consequences of the action then reflect on somebody else, because sin has consequences. Right? We can thank God that no longer our eternal consequences are there. We have to be eternally separated from God. However, there are still consequences in the modern, in our actual lives for our sins that happen. We're going to have to pay some consequences for that. Go ahead, Dylan.
I think today most of the things that are passed on are like bigotry.
Okay.
If mom and daddy hate black, kids gonna hate black.
Mm-hmm.
They pass it on down. Blacks hate white, they pass it on down.
Okay.
And I think this is something that was shown in Uvalde.
Mm-hmm.
Another high profile shooting.
Mm-hmm. There's probably some mental illness involved there as well. But yes, I think there's something to be said about that. That's an interesting point. But yeah, I would agree that usually what the parents have will usually get passed down to the children in usually some kind of capacity. Go ahead.
So it comes down to, it makes me think of nature versus nurture,
Mm-hmm.
and talking about what you're exposed to,
Yes.
kind of thing. Like you said, it's not a genetic thing that is in your makeup that is being passed down. It's what you've been raised around. But at the same time, this may be speculation, but with what we talked about last week, with how Leah, the word hate was used in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we know,
And against you, Scripture.
right? We don't know specific instances of what was happening for her to feel that way. Obviously, God saw it and acknowledged it, but then it makes you wonder if those children, the ones that hate now Joseph, if they felt something in their upbringing because of things that were being maybe done to their mother or whatever, and that's where that generation curse is being subliminally messaged or whatever through.
Quit jumping ahead of them.
No,
Am I
that's
really?
good. That's good. No, that's good. I mean, I like that. I mean, you know,
that's just what
I was
it makes me think
going to
of.
make that point myself, but it's better that you're making it. Personally, I think it is better that you're making it because yes, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Right? Like what is being done between the parents, not just with the favoritism of Rachel and the favoritism of Joseph Benjamin, but also the negative feelings that may have been felt towards Leah at that point, right? Also affecting how the children of Leah would then feel, and also the children of the handmaidens,
Right.
both of them would also feel. It's all very interesting. Yes, but I think we are seeing consequences in action here. Now, consequences that God then would later use, we all know, to benefit the people of Israel and, you know, everything else later. However, right now we're seeing negative consequences come into play because not only are the brothers having some issues because they hate Joseph, but then they're going to reflect that because of maybe what they've seen or things that have been passed down to them. So Joseph, he's a dreamer. Joseph has some powerful dreams, and he gets to interpret those and also have some dreams himself. Now he first has a dream that there's these sheaves that are representing him and his brothers. They're bundling these sheaves together, and then his sheath just stands up on its own, and the other brother's sheaves, the sheaves that are representing his brothers, do what towards his sheath? Bow down to his. So Joseph had a dream that sheaves representing his brothers bowed down to his. Bow down to his sheath. Now, if you've already got a bit of a bone to pick with somebody, and then they tell you that they had a dream that these things representing each of themselves would then be, you would have to be bowing down to this person that you've already got some animosity to. You think that's going to go well? I don't think that's going to go too well, right? I don't think they're going to receive that and go, you know what? Yeah, I think I already have this deep-seated resentfulness of you.
What was Joseph thinking?
Yeah, that's quite. Well, I think he was just excited. He's like, I had this awesome dream. Let me tell you about it. But I probably would have not said anything. Probably would just kept it in my own heart and been like, okay, this is something to remember for myself that you will one day bow down to me. Not that I'm going to tell them about it, because I feel like he knew. There's no doubt that he knew that they had some issues, right? I think it even says in the text that they spoke unkindly to him or something of that effect. So, or didn't speak to him or something like that. I forget where the actual what the actual wording is. Couldn't speak peaceably to them. I think that is actually what the text says. Thank you. Yes, and so that's already the case. I don't think I'm going to be like, yeah, you're going to bow down to me. I don't think it's going to.
Maybe he said it because they're not speaking kindly to him anyway. He's daddy's favorite. What are they going to do?
That's fair. That's fair.
Or
That's fair.
It could be that he thinks that that's the turning point, like that there's something else that could come of it, and that he doesn't really, like, he's ignorant to the turmoil that he's going to add to.
That he's
versus
going to add to, yeah.
That he thinks in his mind maybe that meant things were solved or something.
Interesting thoughts all around. I think it could be any number of these things. It could be a combination of these things. And I think there's something to that, right? I mean, if you're your dad's favorite, like
you can't touch me.
You can't touch me, exactly. You can't touch me until they do. But yeah, I mean, you would think that for sure. And so once again, this caused his brothers to hate him even more, and the text even says, "Hate him even more." That's the word that is used there. It's a very stern word. It says hate. So one day, his brothers are out shepherding, got the flock elsewhere, right? Of course, he's the favorite. He's not going to be put in risk with the sheep, I guess, doing things out in the wilderness. But his father does ask him to go check on his brothers, find out about them, report some news to them. So he goes out, which I think this is kind of a dangerous trip anyway, by yourself out in the wilderness to go and track down your brothers. But he goes, he finds his brothers, Dothan, and his brothers look at him while he's far out, because I'm imagining, I know certain places in the Promised Land are very mountainous. I guess at this point they can really see him from a distance, far off, walking towards him. And he's not driving, obviously, so it's going to take him a while to get to where he is, where they can see him to where he's at. And they're kind of devising some plans. And most of them are just like, let's just kill him, because I'm tired of this guy. Let's just kill him. That's what their plans are. Now, who is the brother that has other plans? Reuben, which we know Reuben is in what order of birth?
First.
He is the firstborn of all of them. Right? He is the firstborn of all of them. And he's got a little bit of a plan. Now, let's not say that, oh yeah, Reuben, such great stuff because he protected Joseph. It wasn't his goal, right? His ambitions were very selfish. Because his goal was, okay, I'm going to go away, and you guys are going to throw him in the pit. And then I'm going to come and save him from you guys.
I'm scared of Dad.
Yes, yeah. It's not. We're actually going to save him in general, which is going to be, you guys are going to throw him in the pit, and I'm going to save him for the sake of the Father, and then say, look what I did. I helped save your son, and then I'm going to get some reward or praise for that. That's what Reuben's goal is. We know this because Reuben then leaves, and then when he comes back, he tears his clothes because he was like, this is my opportunity to gain some favor. I could have done this. Go ahead.
Reckon it's that, or reckon Reuben's thinking, hey, I'm going to get a double portion of everything when Dad dies. So, I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that.
I mean, potentially. But I'll say though, it does seem to be in the plan. He does say, so that way I can, so, hold on. Reuben, verse 21, let us not take his life. Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him in the pit here in the wilderness. Do not lay a hand on him. And it says that he may rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So it could be because he didn't want to jeopardize it, or what I think is he's trying to get some kind of reward or special favor from his father in this way, because he saved him from his brothers. Now, if you're the brothers, of course, why would you just go along with that? Be like, yeah, totally, we'll make ourselves look awful to make you look good, Reuben. I don't.
It doesn't say he's going to tell him the brothers. He's just going to restore him. He's going to find him in there.
Well, but who's going to put him in there?
And say, oh, I found him. He fell in.
but who's going to put him in there, though? He's not just going to fall in. His brothers are clearly going to do it. So, because his brothers didn't do it.
His other brothers did it.
His other brothers did it. But if you're one of the other brothers, why would you go along with this
He
plan?
didn't tell them.
Mhm.
The quote ends before that,
So that he might rescue them. Yeah. Should know both of them.
Well,
Yeah.
I
Do not
think-
lay a hand. Yes. Yeah. So I suppose so. But I don't understand how he thinks he's going to get in the pit
But
otherwise.
I think the main point here, if God is in control, he's not going to let him kill him.
Well, yes, that is correct. That is what ends up happening, of course. Yeah, but it's just interesting. I don't think this plan was that well thought through, to be honest.
It's done out of anger.
So
When you do something out of anger or hatred, is it ever well thought through?
that's probably correct. Yes.
They were just thinking about it.
It was premeditated, though. It was. They were thinking. They were like, "That little jerk. We're gonna get him when he comes here." So yeah, it was premeditated, but it was done out of anger, though. I do. Yeah, that is fair. Said not exactly the greatest plan in general. So Reuben thinks have him in the pit. They put him in the pit.
And
And
so
then
when it says restore, that makes
So-
me think Reuben's already got Dad mad at him.
Adam, maybe that's the case.
You know, so it's not saying to gain even more, but to restore
Restore.
makes you think
So-
something's broken.
Mm-hmm.
Something between
It could-
Reuben
it
and his
could be
dad are
something
broken.
there. That's
Well,
very
and it
true.
may
And
be
he's
how
trying to fix it.
Yeah.
it may be stemming from how they've been treating him.
So,
You know,
and it is. Yeah, that's true. I mean, he could have been the ringleader in the hazing beforehand. I don't know. There's some kind of things like
but
that.
the thought on the fact that the oldest getting, you know, this,
Mhm.
he's in line to be the one to receive.
He is.
Whatever,
Even though Joseph is the favorite, he should be the one getting it. though,
So
really,
the other
should be.
brothers
So-
that were, you know, there's nothing for them to jeopardize. Like they could be the ones that could be the guilty ones without it really affecting them.
I still don't think I want to go along with that, though.
I know.
Let's see how this guy helping other people. But yes, I do see your point, though. I don't think it's a bad idea. Go ahead.
But I put God had other plans.
But God had other plans. Well, you could have put that God had other plans.
Because
Yes.
it was his control.
Yes. Well, he had other plans in the grand narrative, and I figured somebody would do that. That's why you should maybe wait to fill them out while we're going through them. But yeah, yes. But Reuben was the one who had other plans in the immediacy, because they were trying to kill him. They were. All the other brothers were like, let's just murder him. But Reuben had the other plans at this point, and then Judah afterwards. Now this is kind of a funny scene. They've thrown their brother in a pit. Their brother is in the pit, or a cistern, as it was in your translation, a cistern, down in this hole in the ground where they would have been digging for water. Is really what the essence of what these pits would have been. Throws them in there. Then they're just going to sit down and have a nice meal, because that's what's happening. It later says in the text they sat down to have some lunch. Quite something. They must have been enjoying this. I mean, they're like dinner in a show. I mean, we're just going to watch our brother suffer down there while we have some lunch.
That he brought.
So because that's exactly the thing. Because he would have been bringing stuff out to his brothers to take care of them in this instance. So that's even worse, doesn't it? That makes it even worse. It's like, thanks for the lunch, bam, and then kick him in the pit, and then enjoy watching his suffering while he's down there.
Could have let him eat first.
Yes. Well, yeah. Oh, and it even says there's no water down there, so he's just struggling. You know, I
Well,
mean,
if there'd been water, he'd be drowning.
he would have been drowned. Would depend on how much water, I guess. But regardless, this is not a comfortable situation, and they're just enjoying every second of it. Not good stuff. Now, Judah, who was originally on the murder train earlier, is now like, hey, it's not going to benefit us in any way if we do actually kill him or do anything like that. Because it seems like whenever Reuben went away, they're kind of like, we should just kill him anyway. But then he says, no, wait. It's not going to benefit us to murder him. On the other hand, let's do something different, because there's some people coming, and we can sell Joseph into slavery. So they decided to sell Joseph into slavery, and I'll get to that in a second as well. But first, I want to talk about Judah. Judah is about to have a story in verse 28 that's also kind of like, ugh. Judah's not a good person. Judah's not a good person. It's shown in the story of Joseph. It's shown in the next chapter afterwards, and I'll let you read that on your own. I'm not talking about that story. So, I mean, I could eventually, but I'm not in this class. But we can talk about that another time. Judah is not a good person. Yet we know, from what tribe did Jesus descend from?
Judah.
The tribe of Judah. You would think he would descended from one of the tribes of Joseph, maybe, but no, from Judah. Go ahead.
So my view in this story, Reuben and Judah were the good people because Judah said, "Let's not kill him." He was trying to not have that guilt.
I don't necessarily think it was guilt. I think it was that, hey, this guy's traveling. You know what? I can make money. Let's sell him and we'll never have to deal with him again.
I can make some pieces
That's
of
the
silver.
excuse he used to get the brothers on his side.
He's thinking profit.
I think he's thinking profit as well. I don't know. It's kind of it could be either way. I mean, that's an interesting view of it, Don. I think that is a view on it that would be a much more optimistic view.
Well, I mean, it's not like they're killing him in the heat of the moment. Like he comes upon them and they threw him in the pit.
Yeah.
They sat down at the meal. They've had some time to think about it.
Yeah.
And as he's sitting there thinking, I've got to go face my father after murdering my brother. Maybe I don't want to carry that around.
Yeah.
I could sell him and feel
Maybe reason is starting to get to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's possible.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, right? Because we talk about heat of the moment, maybe not the best plans. Now they're thinking.
I don't think it was necessarily the heat of the moment because they had a plan by the time he got there.
Yeah.
They were going to dip his coat in blood and say a wild animal got it.
Yeah. Well, but couldn't we say though that we make decisions as well sometimes that, you know, we can build ourselves up to a decision, and maybe even though we've had time to think about it, it's still a bad decision, but we built our bad decision up. Make the bad decision. Yes. Well, I think there's something to the fact that I think they have had some time to calm down. They had a little bit more of a level head. And they thought, well, if we take him out of the pit now and bring him back to the father, he's going to tell him that we did this. So I don't think we can do that. Killing him, I don't think that's going to be of any real benefit to us, because then I got to carry his blood on my hands for the rest of my life. And maybe his forefathers would have told him about other instances like this, like, I don't know, Cain and Abel. And maybe he didn't want that particular sin on him. And so then they said, okay, let's do this. Let's sell him to this traveling caravan coming through. Interesting. Yeah, I think there's something to that. Two things. Number one, Joseph sold for what kind? 20 pieces of what? Silver. An echo of a future selling of somebody for silver. Different amounts, but silver nonetheless being sold for, right? Two different cases for that. And also, the traders that they sold Joseph to were of whose descendants? Ishmael. So they are called Ishmaelites. I'm literally looking this up because I spelled it earlier. It's a hard thing to spell. Ishmaelites, which we know, which we know would have been, so, Hagar's son of
like
Abraham. So they would have been related.
They would have been like
Go ahead.
cousins.
Yes.
How does 20 shekels of silver, gold, whatever it is?
Equate to 30 pieces of silvers in Roman days?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I don't think we really know the exchange rate of 3000 AD. If we did, maybe it would equate to the same. Maybe it would. And maybe the biblical authors knew that better than we do, because that's hard for us 5,000 years later to equate the exchange rates, because we can usually do that pretty well in like Roman times, because things are pretty well documented in Roman times. It's a little bit harder 3,000 years ago. Go ahead.
Not everything in the Bible symbolizes something.
Sometimes not.
You have to-
However,
you don't have to go into mental acrobatics.
But I think it's important though whenever we see things like that we equate, especially if they relate to Jesus. Yes.
And there's nothing wrong in asking questions.
I think that's fair as well. So yes, I think there's something to that. So I don't know exactly how much the values are, but I think it's interesting though. main character of the story being sold for silver, main character of the story later being sold for silver. I think there's something that's being equated there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes. The actual numbers though themselves, I'm not exactly sure. But something to consider on our own time.
And the perpetrators later agreed that they had done it.
I think that's very smart.
Both cases.
So yeah. So once again, selling them to family at this point. Like I said, not too distant. I mean, only 3 generations at this point? 3 generations, Isaac? 3-4 generations at this point? I think so. 3 generations at this point. Not that far removed from each other. The Ishmaelites, who then would have bought Joseph at this point. They're also called Midianites as well. Midianites or Ishmaelites. They kind of use both words. But I think that's important that they emphasize that they were Ishmaelites, though, because, of course, that makes the connection between family. Go ahead.
Well, that too, and I think Midianites come into importance later on.
They will. Quite a bit.
So,
right.
I mean, there are parallels.
Yes.
With everything in the Bible, no matter what.
Yes, I agree.
God said he'd make him a mighty nation.
He did. He did. And I mean, up to this point, I mean, the fact that they're already kind of a nation of themselves, whenever even the promised descendants are only like a family. I mean, the fact that these are Ishmaelites, like they've got a whole nation in and of themselves, while the people of Israel are still just one family at this point. You know, I think that kind of speaks to how great of a nation they became very quickly. Very quickly. So Reuben comes back to the scene that's everything's happening, and he's upset when he sees that Joseph was gone, because he's like, I had a whole plan in place here. I was going to do a whole thing, and I was going to get rewarded, and now he's gone, and it's you guys' fault. And so he does the symbol of being upset in a very large capacity, which is he rends his garments, tears his clothes. Whenever he sees that Joseph is gone. Now, the reason for that most likely is because I've missed out on my reward. But it could be other things. It could be remorse for what has happened. But regardless, he's very upset when he sees that Joseph is gone. And, of course, then we know that the brothers then make it look like a wild animal had killed Joseph. And I think it's interesting, Jenna, because you hear what Reuben says afterwards, because then he says, how can I even go back to my father? What am I going to do? The boy is gone, and where shall I go? Because he knows as the oldest, okay, thank you. He knows as the oldest, the responsibility for this is going to fall on him. Even though he wasn't even there when it happened, when he sold him into slavery and everything else like that. I'm not trying to clear him of his wrongdoing in this instance, but he wasn't even there in this way, but it's going to fall on him. They're going to look to the oldest, right, and say, it was on you. Jacob's going to say, this is your fault because you should have been blah, 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 because you're the oldest, you should be the most responsible in this way. So there's another reason why Reuben is also upset, not just because of his lack of reward, but also because he's going to get blamed for all of this. He's going to be in the doghouse majorly. And if the theory earlier was that he was already in the doghouse, yes, you said restore him at this point. If he was already in the doghouse, he's even going to be in the worst doghouse. No, it's bad. So he's in a bad spot. He's in a really bad spot. So they try to make it look as good as possible that they had nothing to do with it, of course, because they're just going to say, oh, we were traveling back and we found his robe and it was blood all over it, so he must have been killed by somebody else, something else. We killed him along the way back. And then I have Israel / Jacob, because Coach talked about earlier. Name kind of gets exchanged quite a bit because he's now supposed to be called Israel, but sometimes he's called Jacob. He also tears his garment or rends them, depending on your translation. Tears or rends his garments. When he heard the news about Joseph at this point. Because, of course, he's very upset now. But Joseph is over in Egypt's land with Potiphar, and we know what's going to happen from that point forward. Go ahead.
It says, they never mention girls. But it says, all his sons and all his daughters.
All of one daughter.
Rose up to comfort him.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that they use the plural. I'm not a Hebrew aficionado, so I'd like to look at the original word there because we know he's only got one. He's only got one. Yeah. So
Is
kind of
anybody
interesting.
married at this point?
I was gonna say
Maybe that's
the
it.
older
Yeah.
sons could be
Yeah,
married.
the older sons were probably
They-
married at this point, so maybe that's who it is. So his daughters-in-law. Because I don't know if they had a word for that at that time, like we do today, the in-laws.
They do,
Because other times it's called. Well, I wonder if
They-
we translate it that way in Scripture
to set aside.
to set aside. Well, I wonder because we know in certain instances because, like for example, we know Moses' father-in-law. He talked to him, and it literally calls him in-law. I wonder if that's a word that is used, that is actually in the Hebrew, or it's just what we do. Anyway, regardless, that's something to think about. But yes, daughters. I think at this point, I think you're right. I think it is probably his daughters-in-law at this point who are probably trying to comfort him at this point. And something that's interesting because it says that he put the ash on his loins, which is like, that seems very strange. But if you think about if you're like down on the ground and you are in ash and the sackcloth, then where is the ash going to get? Kind of everywhere, especially if you're down on the ground. And this kind of, I think, symbolizes where he was at this point. He wasn't sitting or laying in bed in his sorrow. He's on the ground in his sorrow, inconsolable, not unconsolable, inconsolable at his moment. So now, of course, we are going to talk about God's plan later. God has a plan. He's going to make good things come of the bad things. Not that he approves of the bad things in the first place, but he uses his imperfect people to do his perfect will later on. And we will, of course, see that in the story of Joseph. We're going to skip some of the kind of more talked about details and just try to hit the highlights next week. Actually, not next week. Speaking of which. So we will not be meeting next week because, of course, I will be traveling to Bandina next Sunday because that is already happening. So I will not be here next week. I do not believe we have plans for anybody to take over the class for me next week.
You haven't talked to Robert?
They're pointing at Matt.
I haven't seen him. So, hey Matt, would you like to teach?
Teach something.
Okay, if you'd like to. All right, fine. Then we will have our class next week, and Matt will be teaching us, and he can either continue with material or he can talk on his own thing. Would you rather talk on your own thing?
Doesn't matter to me. We can talk after.
We'll have those conversations separately. But please come next week and listen to Matt teach. And I'm very jealous of you all that you get to hear Matt teach. So you have that. So let's have a prayer real quick, and then I'll let y'all go. Dear God, our Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this day. I want to thank you for all the blessings that you provide to us. I want to thank you again for your inspired word, which leads us to you and teaches us more about you and teaches us more about how we should live for you, Father. So please help us to do that in our lives. Help us to try to live better for you each day, and help us to bring as many of your children to your kingdom as possible, so that way we can spend more and more time with more and more people in your eternity, Father. So we ask this blessing and prayer in your Son's name. Amen. Thank you all.
You got my brain.
You got your brain rolled? Well, that's good. That's what I hope this